Well, hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Bonnie Watson Coleman, and I am here today with Erin Witte. Erin is the Director of Consumer Protection at the Consumer Federation of America. And I asked her to come and chat today about a topic that I hear about from my constituents quite a bit lately. Erin, it seems like everyone is talking about junk fees and how they impact everyday people. Can you tell us about the magnitude of this problem and what it says about our country?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and giving me an opportunity to talk with you about this. I know it's something that you hear a lot about, and I know that you really care about your constituents and the way that these issues impact them. So, thank you for being such a great advocate and just creating space to have this conversation. Um, Junk fees is getting a lot of attention lately, and so it feels like a new issue, but it's really not new. It's just that we've finally been able to put a name to this practice that touches the vast majority of people in this country. It's almost like when you've been sick and you finally get a diagnosis and you can put your finger on what's wrong and then start to treat it. And it's a rare issue that people across political spectrums can get behind, but that just shows you how many people this impacts, right? It's not a political issue, it impacts everybody. Everyone can identify with this and has experienced a junk fee or some type of deceptive fee practice. We've been hearing about things like airline fees, concert fees, hotel resort fees, but it really is so much more broad than that when you step back and look at it.
So when you think about this issue, how many people do you think that are being impacted by it? And just how much money are we losing to junk fees?
Well, Consumer Reports conducted a study in 2019 that showed that over 85% of people who responded to their survey said that they had experienced a hidden or unexpected junk fee in the prior 2 years. It's hard to calculate exactly how much money these greedy corporations are taking from people in junk fees, but it's astronomical. Hotels alone, as an example, charged over $2 billion in hotel resort fees in a single year. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been very active on junk fees. They estimated that by cutting down on another type of junk fee, which is credit card late fees, would save consumers from paying $9 billion. Imagine what people could do with that money if it was in their pockets instead of in the hands of these greedy corporations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I know that we've all experienced them in some way or form, but there are certain fees that have a disproportionate impact on marginalized communities, low income communities, single mothers, people of that nature. Would you want to speak to that a little bit? Because
Yeah,
I know that that's an issue for us both.
absolutely. And like I said, I know that you have been such a wonderful advocate on the issue of pricing discrimination for things like car insurance and how that impacts low income and minority consumers in things like sponsoring the PAID Act, for example. So I know this is an issue that's near and dear to your heart and that it really affects a lot of your constituents. The fact is that it's expensive to be poor. For higher income families, these fees can feel like a nuisance. It may not have the same impact for someone who's making over $75,000 a year, but for low income families, it can be devastating. It can push them over the edge into poverty, and it can also keep people trapped in this cycle of debt that is so difficult to get out of. The more late you are, the more fees you incur. The more fees you incur, the higher your debt is. It just keeps sort of piling on top of itself. We see this really often in the financial services sector with things like credit card late fees, overdraft fees. When your car lender makes you pay a fee if you use a payment method other than a bank account, we call these pay to pay fees. It's just charging people more because they don't have access to a bank account. And we know that that disproportionately affects low income consumers. The amount of these fees, especially in financial services like credit cards and overdraft, is not proportionate to the cost that that lender incurs when someone is actually late, but it's rather intended to just penalize someone who can't afford to make their payments on time or who may not have access to a bank account.
You know, I have two personal examples. I have paid off a credit card, and then I get a bill for $2.30.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, what could this possibly be? I paid the entire credit card off, whatever that amount was. And a couple of times I just let it go. But then this one time in particular, I I called the credit card company, like, what is this? And they
Mhm.
said, oh, well, it's a processing fee. Apparently, when you paid your credit card off, this was already in the works to come. I said, that makes no sense.
Right.
And I'm not paying it.
Right.
And I didn't pay it. And it was fine. But I stood up for myself,
Mhm.
even though it was just really a small amount. Now,
Mhm.
when I've gone into a resort and you've got all these fees that show up on your bill, and
Right.
then there's like just a fee, and like, well, what is that fee for? I paid for the room, I
Mhm.
paid for whatever food or drink came to the room. What's this fee about? And those fees are much higher.
Right. Yeah, the fees can really run the gamut, and something that is like a $2 fee, in with internet service providers, they've charged things like an internet recovery fee or something that seems sort of named in a benign way that makes it look like you just should be paying it or don't worry about it. And $2 might not seem like that much one time, but when you're charging it every month for years on end without any oversight, it's enormously expensive for consumers overall and a huge profit for this internet provider, telecommunications provider. So there are certain states that have been really active in enforcing this and really calling these telecommunications providers out and saying, this is nonsense, right? Like this fee was not an actual fee. It's just a profit center. You should have stopped charging it. But there are so many other types of fees, and there are some much more expensive ones that are a whole different ballgame.
So what are two or more of the most egregious fees that you've encountered?
So there, so I have two examples that stand out to me for a couple of different reasons. The first one is rental housing. You mentioned single mothers as a big part of your constituency. Rental housing fees can be terrible. First, it can be extremely expensive to just fill out an application for rental housing. And people who may have issues with their credit or who are credit stressed are going to have to fill out numerous applications at $100, $200 a piece. That adds up very, very quickly. And second, shady landlords impose fees for whatever they can think of. And people who are desperate to keep their housing will pay that fee just to stay in their house and avoid being evicted. So landlords are in this really powerful position to just charge fees for whatever they want. Um, one report showed that a landlord charged a fee just because it happened to be the month of January. Um, so rental fees are pretty egregious, but we also see it a lot with auto dealers charging junk fees. Again, this has always been a bit of an issue, and it can take hours or sometimes even weeks just to figure out what fees you have to pay to buy the car. We all go to a car dealership and say, how much is it going to cost? What do I have to pay out the door? You don't get there normally until you spent a significant amount of time with the car dealer and they have turned everything into a fee that you have to pay to buy the car. The Federal Trade Commission has been very keyed in on this issue, not only with the transparency aspect, telling people more upfront and earlier in the process, here's what you're going to have to pay to buy the car, but then also looking at the actual fees that dealers are charging and fees that are disproportionately charged to minority consumers. They brought a few enforcement actions against car dealers that were imposing higher fees and more add-on products and services to Black and Hispanic consumers.
Well, that is a big issue. I mean, we find out that those who are most vulnerable generally get walloped the worst in this situation and in many others. And so do you have specific ideas, thoughts about how regulators need to deal with this, not just anecdotally, not just in one industry? Is
Yeah.
there some way that we should be crafting legislation or regulations that deal with how fees are determined, how they're legitimized, and what one can do about them if one feels that they're not fair?
Yeah. Well, one good thing that we've seen, a very top down approach from the Biden administration, is first of all, calling out junk fees and bringing attention to the issue. Because, like I said at the beginning, this isn't new. This has been happening for a very long time. It's just that we can put a name to it. And that helps us really identify where the fees are and help us to evaluate, like you did, a second guess, a look back to say, really, should I be paying that? So I love that approach as a start. But we also have seen the federal government take an all hands on deck approach to this. Lots of federal agencies are using their enforcement, their regulatory, their supervision powers to address this in different ways. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has really been a leader here. We've seen them using pretty much every tool in their arsenal to attack junk fees. They've brought enforcement actions. They've conducted research. They've started regulating this issue in their supervision. Their actions are literally saving people billions of dollars in junk fees. The Federal Trade Commission has also started a rulemaking on this issue, and their rulemaking actually tries to address this a bit more holistically and look at the entire practice and say, what types of conduct are we seeing here? How are these fees being assessed? And, what are they actually paying for? The Department of Transportation is also pushing back on junk fees, primarily in the form of family seating, charging people a fee to sit next to your kids on a flight. I mean, can you think of anything worse? Thankfully, the Department of Transportation is asking Congress to specifically ban this fee altogether. And the Federal Communications Commission has also been active here, taking a transparency approach. I mentioned previously internet service providers that are charging, these nonsense fees that you can't quite identify. You don't know what they are. My cell phone bill, your internet bill, it can be really difficult to understand and even find the fees. But they've adopted a rule that would require a lot more transparency in that respect. But at the end of the day, what we really need is Congress to step up and adopt a Junk Fees Prevention Act, to take bold action here and say, we're not going to tolerate this any longer. We're going to regulate this issue holistically.
I think that's really important. I think Congress definitely has a role here. There are individuals who are saddled with these fees, like the person filing for a housing application or rental application, but they're afraid to report it, or they don't have the time or the capacity to report it in a manner that's going to make a difference for them. And so we need to be working proactively to ensure that our protections are in place for everybody, particularly those who are least able to fight for themselves. So I really appreciate having this opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I look forward to having further conversation as we move along, because perhaps what we'll do is also identify other instances that people may not be thinking about. There really isn't a necessary fee that doesn't represent any cost to the company or the corporation or whatever, but it's just a money grab. And I was motivated to move on that $2 and some cent item, because I knew if they were collecting it from me, they were collecting it from millions of people.
Absolutely. And I love that thought process of saying, if it's affecting me, I know it's affecting other people. And I know that this issue is so important for you in the way that this impacts your constituents. And, lots of people all over, but especially these low-income, minority, historically disadvantaged communities, it's hitting them particularly hard. And I know that sometimes consumers feel like their voice doesn't matter, but truly, I think that this issue is indicative of the fact that you have a voice and it is powerful. Being able to tell your story to your legislator, your local legal aid office, your state consumer affairs agency, any of the federal agencies, sharing your story far and wide and being able to use this to help other people is getting so much traction. And I would really encourage anyone listening to share your story far and wide if you're able to.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. I probably have another example when I tried to buy a car and I responded to an ad in the paper that says, for this particular car, it would cost you X number of dollars a month. I went to the car dealer and he tried to do a whole bunch of other things. And I kept saying, no, and I'm going to report you. And he would try to come up with another scenario. And I go, no, that's not what the newspaper said. I brought the ad with me. There's no condition here. No, I'm going to call the Consumer Protection Bureau. And I stood up for myself and I walked out of there with exactly the amount of money that the advertisement said. So, we can make a difference. I want people to use their voice. I want to hear their particular experience so that I can be more grounded in how I can be more helpful to them. So I would very much want to hear about their experience with junk fees. And in the link below this video, there will be a survey. And I encourage everyone to just take 5 minutes just to answer the question, share your story with me and my staff so that what you share with me might be helpful to someone else. Thank you so much. I really appreciated your time and the work that you're doing. Thank you, and God bless.